There we go. Okay, so this Mishnah is, we're continuing on in the fours in chapter 5, Mishnah 12. In the fours, we had seen that there were four characteristics in a person. A person says, what's mine is mine, yours is yours. And then the characteristics of the deos, of the temperaments in a person, people that are easy to anger and easy to calm down. And we had specific ways of understanding those mishnayos, which I will remind us of in a few minutes. And then we have this mishnah, which says that there are arba midos, that there are four characteristics in learners, right? Four characteristics in people that learn, and that is Mar lishmoa, Mar la'abed. Mar lishmoa means that a person who hears quickly, in other words, he gets the lesson very fast. Umar la'abed, but he loses it very quickly also. So, like, did you ever go to a lecture? Like, go to a shir, you listen to the shir, and it is so gishmak. It's like a piece of candy, and it's like, whoa, that is such a great idea. Then you get in the car, you get home, your wife says to you, "No, what did he say?" And you go, "Oh, it was great. It was amazing, like really amazing." What did he say? You got to have been there. If you were there, you really would have gotten it. And you can't remember a thing, right? You can say, well, he spoke about, well, what what was the subject? Torah. So that's an example of a Mar Lishmo person. You get it. There's no question during the thing that you got it, you understood it. And it went in and it affected you on a very deep level. But as far as actually understanding and being able to retain it, so then that doesn't go. So the Mishnah says, Yatsa scharo, so you have lost your reward, behefsedo, in the loss, which means the gain that you got from the fact that you were able to understand it so quickly and that it went in so smoothly, that was actually lost by the fact that it went out so smoothly also. Okay, number one. Number two, kasha lishmoa. So I want to assume that kasha lishmoa means that a person who it's hard for him to hear, which means that he's not getting everything. It's hard to understand. Some people are not auditory learners. So when they listen to a lecture, they're like cooked because they have to see something. They have to see some words, some charts, some picture. They can't just get the words in. It doesn't go in smooth, especially in complicated shurim where you ask four questions and then you bring a principle and you use that to answer all things. Like they're lost by question number two. There were just people like that. It's kasha lishmo. It's hard for them to hear. But once they got it, once they go over it, and once they put it in their head, then kasha la'abed, it'll be in there forever. They don't remember things right away. They don't understand things right away. But if they put effort into it and they put it inside of their heads, so then kasha la'abed is difficult to lose. So on the one hand, it's a bad thing because it's hard for you to understand. On the other hand, it's a very good thing because it's hard for you to lose it. So yotzef seido b'scharo. So the loss is offset by the gain. The gain of being able to retain it is greater than the loss of having it so hard to be able to assimilate. Okay, number three, maher lishmo v'kasha la'abed. A person who understands things quickly and retains them amazingly, that's a chacham. That's a wise person. Kasha lishmoa, number four, it's hard to hear. In other words, he is difficulty learning. Umar la'abed, and everything that goes in goes out again. Right? It's like in one ear, out the other. It took him a long time to get it, and once he gets it, he still can't remember it. Zeh chelek ra. That's a bad portion. That's of course a bad portion. You can't understand anything and you can't remember anything. You're like a brick of wood. You're like a stick. Well, that's terrible. Ay vey. You have a student like that. That student is behind the 8 ball their entire lives. Like of course it's a chelek ra. I need a mishna to tell me that. That's bad. Thank you very much. I wouldn't have known that without the Mishnah. So what does that mean? This whole Mishnah is difficult for me. The reason why this Mishnah I find difficult, it won't be difficult by the time we finish, but the reason why I find this Mishnah difficult is, first of all, when we talked about those other two fours, when we said that there were four characteristics in a person, That was like a critical to a person's life, right? That a person who was a selfish person, a person who was a benevolent person. When we talked about the anger, and we talked about the concept of anger, that was a very important concept. There was a greater concept that came out of it, which we'll talk about again. But that's an important concept. But Arba Midas B'Talmidim, why is that such a critical concept? What? Okay, fine. So there are 4 different learners. There are 4 ways to learn. So, some have it easier, some have it harder. Like, why is this an important Mishnah? My second problem is that when we say that the level number 2, which is a person who it's hard for him to learn, but once he got it, it's hard to forget. Think about that carefully. If it's hard to learn, that means you're learning like 60% of the material. And what do you remember? 60% of the material. Shkayach. You're still missing 40%. In other words, if you're a kasha lilmod, if it's hard for you to learn, and it's hard for you to assimilate and get it inside until you work hard at it, it doesn't seem to be saying that you're getting the whole picture. You're still getting a part of the picture. So what are you remembering? You're remembering Swiss cheese, like you're remembering something with holes in it. So why is that a great thing? Wow, I'm so proud of you that you remembered that, but you only remembered one small part of an entire lecture or of an entire idea, right? You know, my father used to make my sister, when she went to Stern College, so she was taking class in halacha, and she used to get tests in halacha. So she would get like, my sister was a very smart person, so she would get like a 98 or a 90 on a test. My father said, it's like a 0. He says, because if you don't know the whole halacha, it's not. He wasn't giving her a hard time, academically, but he said, if you don't know the whole halacha, and you only got 98% of it, if you make a mistake on 1% or a 0.5%, you haven't done the mitzvah, right? You have to take 4 species on Sukkot. So you remember you have to take lulav, you remember you have to take an esrog, you remember you have to take hadassim, but you didn't remember that you have to take a ravis. So you take the 3 of them, and you stand there and you shuckle and you sway and you pray all day, you're doing beautiful. At the end of the day, what did you do? Garnished. You did nothing. Shkayach that you went and you took something, you did something, you waved it, but it's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is all 4. So the fact that this person is a kasha lishmaya, the kasha la'abed, and it's hard to forget. Good. What are you not forgetting? You're not forgetting nothing. It's nothing. So great. You're not forgetting it. I'm glad to hear that. But you didn't remember anything because you didn't get anything. So what is that? Why do we say there, Yatzav Seder B'Scharo, that the loss is offset by the gain? Why is the loss offset by the gain? The second, my third problem is, look at number 3. Amar lishmo v'kashal abed, that it goes in and it never goes out. So what do we call that? We call that a chacham. As far as I know, chachma is not merely the ability to retain. You have to do something with your wisdom. It has to go somewhere. So it's not just the fact that, wow, you got a good memory, shkayach. So you have a good memory, fine, and you chap things very easily, and you're able to say them over, you're able to remember them, but that doesn't mean that you're a chacham. And not only doesn't it mean you're a chacham, when the Torah, it says in Parshas Bechukosai, the last parsha in Vayikra, so it says, Im bechukosai telechu, if you walk in my ways, so then you're going to get all kinds of blessings. Our rabbis wonder, what does the word bechukosai telechu mean, if you walk in my ways? Because if you look at the rest of the verses, the verses talk about if you keep my Torah, if you keep my commandments. So what does it mean when it says, if you walk in my ways? What is walk in my ways different than keeping my Torah, learning my Torah, doing my mitzvos? What is walking in the ways? So the Rashi brings down from the Talmud that what it means is to you a melim b'Torah, that you have to work hard and toil in Torah, and that if you toil in Torah, if you work hard in Torah, that's when blessing comes, because that is what chachma is. Wisdom comes only from hard work, not from somebody who's a sponge who sits there and and he hears something and it goes in and it stays inside. That's wonderful, but you didn't work at that. It's only when you work at something, is it actually something? Is it actually something valuable? So why are we saying that this is a chacham, this is a wise person? We have a beautiful statement in the Talmud, and the Talmud says that if a person tells you, yagati umatzati, a person says, lo yagati umatzati, I didn't work hard, but I found. Don't believe him. Al tamin. That's what Talmud says. Don't believe him. So a person says, yeah, comes to me naturally, I don't need to work at it. Person's a liar. Person says, yagati v'lo matzati, I worked really hard. I schwitzed, but I wasn't successful. Don't believe him. He didn't schwitz. Because Yagati umatzasi tamin. A person who says, I schwitzed and I was successful, tamin, believe that person. Because success in learning and in knowledge and in understanding only comes with hard work. It only comes with when you push yourself into it and you pour yourself into it. So why is this called a chacham? He's a potential chacham. He's got all the tools to be a chacham. But he's not chacham. It doesn't qualify you. I have another problem. If we call number 3 a wise person, and a person who's a kasher lishmo v'mar la'abed, a person who hears quickly, who learns with great difficulty, and he is a kasher la'abed, and a mar la'abed, it goes out very quickly. So what do we say about that person? We say that's a chilek ra. We say that's a bad person. It's almost like, you're a bad person. What do you mean you're a bad person? You can't call that a bad person. It's what it is. He's not the brightest candle in the box. We don't punish a person who's not the brightest candle in the box. We don't call names to such a person. It's whatever. We say nitzu klug. Yeah, he's not the smartest. It's not the sharpest needle. Okay, shkoyach. There are people like that. Like, what are you giving him a hard time? Zeh chelik ra. And why not? There are other things you can call him. Maybe he's causing this himself. Whatever. You can call him a fool. You can call him things, but you call it a chelek ra. You call it a bad portion. I have another problem with that because, on Pesach we say the 4 sons, and we tell over the whole story of the 4 sons. And the 4 sons are all about how you teach 4 different types of children. And the truth is, it's really how you teach yourself. Because how do you relate to yourself? Because there are times we go through Chacham, Rasha, we go through Tam, we go through Shena Daily Shol. We go through those 4 stages. Every day we go through those 4 stages. So it's really a very important section of the Haggadah. Right at the very beginning of that section, we say the following verse. Baruch hamakom, Baruch hu. Baruch shenasan lanu Torah, Baruch hu. So we say Baruch 4 times. So our rabbis wonder, why do we say Baruch 4 times right before we recite the 4 sons? And our rabbis explain, because the wise, the wicked, the simple, the one who doesn't know to ask, everybody would love to have a bevy of wise children. Everybody would love to have that every one of their children they could call, that's a chacham, that's a wise person. But life doesn't work that way. God doesn't work that way. And some of us have been given children that maybe one of them is a chacham, and maybe one of them is not a sharp tack. One of them is a mishna daily shol, somebody who doesn't know how to ask. But at the end of the day, they're still gifts from God. Our children are still gifts, no matter how much they could produce, no matter what they could do, no matter how strong they are, they're still our gifts. And therefore we say, Baruch, 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 Baruch. Baruch God for the wise son that you gave me. Baruch God for the wicked son that you gave me. Baruch God for the simple son. Baruch God for the one who doesn't know how to ask. Because they're all gifts for God. How can you then say that a person who is not a sharp tack, kasher lishmo mar la'abed, zeh chelek ra? It's a bad portion. It's not a bad portion. It's a portion. Every portion is beautiful. Baruch hamakom. Thank you, God, for giving me this child. Even if it's a child with problems, even if it's a child with difficulties. I've told this story many, 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 many times. But the Chazayin Ish, Zecher Tzaddik v'Kodesh Yivracha, who was in the 1950s, was really like the chief rabbi of the world. The Chazayin Ish, who lived in Eretz Yisrael, would stand up if a Down syndrome child would walk into the room. So when they asked him, Rabbi, why are you standing up? So the Chazayin Ish, because we normally stand up for a great scholar, or we stand up for our parents. But why for a Down syndrome child? And the Chazayin Ish said that any child that's born into this world that doesn't have the ability to keep mitzvahs and is off the hook from keeping mitzvahs, then that neshama, that soul, is an exalted soul. And for an exalted soul, you need to stand up. That's being able to look at everything and be able to recognize that everything ultimately is a gift from Hashem. Rather than looking at it and saying, Oy Nebuch, we look at it and we say, every child, every person in this world is a gift from God. So why do we call this guy? We say, you have a chelik ra, you have a bad portion. You have a portion. Okay. So I'll tell you what I think we're being taught here. If you look at the sequence of the Mishnayos, of the fours that we're in now, so if you remember, and I'm going to remind you of this for the next 4 weeks, that if you remember, when we did the first four, we said that what's going on here is that in the very beginning of this chapter, when we started with 10, we started with the 10 utterances that God used to create the world. And the Mishnah told us that why did God use 10 utterances? Meaning that God could have used one utterance. He could have said, let there be a world. And then fill in the blanks afterwards. Okay, I need a mountain over there and stick me a real high one over there and, and give me something in Tibet and give me a couple of trees there in Northern California. Like he could have figured out where he wanted to put everything, right? The world CAD, right? He could have sat there and played around with it and figured it out. But he could have just created the whole thing in one utterance. Why did he create it in 10 utterances? To make us understand how valuable and precise and incredible the world is. And why do I need to know that? To know when the wicked are blamed for ruining the world, for marring the beautiful world that God gave them, so then they understand that they marred something so complex and so important. And when the righteous support this world and they're mekayim it, they keep this world, they make sure that it's everlasting, so when they get reward for that, they understand the depth of the reward that they get because they have upheld something that is so magnificent and so beautiful. We spoke about in the sevens what happens when the world dissolves. What happens when the wicked take over, so to speak, and the world starts to dissolve. And then in the fours, we now turn to the righteous. And we say, remember how much reward you get for keeping this world. So the righteous turn to us and say, well, then how do I become a righteous person? How do I merit that reward that what God wants to give me for the mitzvahs that I do, for the beauty that I bring into this world? How do I merit that? How do I become a person on that team? On the team of the righteous, not on the team of the wicked. And that's what this section of chapter 5 is coming to tell us. How do you develop yourself? What midos, what characteristics do you have to develop in order to be able to be on this team of the righteous? And the first characteristic that we developed was the understanding of the importance of other people, the depth of what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, the understanding of God's creation in the world. Then the second, when we talked about anger, we said that was all about teaching us how to recognize our nature and how to go against our nature. How to be able to recognize this is who I am, but I do not want to be this way. And we talked about it in terms of anger, because anger is so horrific, because we said that anger was like idolatry, anger was like rejecting God, and therefore we would be able to see the contrast within anger of what it means to go against your nature. And if I can learn how to do it in the midah and the characteristic of anger and patience, then I could do this and spread this out in the rest of my life. And now we take the third step. And what's the third step? The third step is recognizing what our nature is. Recognizing that not everyone is created equal. And that there are people that are naturally smarter and quicker. There are people that have, when it comes to wisdom, when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to understanding, there are people that have innate and ingrained tools that other people don't have. And once I recognize my nature, now I have to not go against my nature. I've got to work with my nature. I've got to accept the fact that this is who I am. I've got to accept the fact that this is what I've got to deal with. I've got to accept the fact that this is the stage of life that I'm in. And therefore, I now have to work with that in order to be able to pull out the potentials that live inside of me. Understand that when God creates us, He creates us with a capacity to reach 100% of our abilities. But that 100% is not equal amongst all people. You could be a 40-watt bulb, he could be a 60-watt bulb, he could be a 120-watt bulb. But that doesn't mean that any bulb is better than the other, because each one of those bulbs was given the capacity to be able to burn at its highest capacity. So you with a 40-watt bulb who are burning 38%, who are burning at 38, and a person with a 120-watt bulb who's burning at 38 are not equal. You're running at 98% capacity, and they're running at 20% capacity. Every person has the ability to reach 100% of their capacity. But the first thing you got to do is to figure out what kind of bulb are you. We talk about it in terms of chachma, in terms of wisdom, in terms of students, because that's something that we're sensitive to. We can recognize how bright or not bright we are, and I mean that metaphorically. Not smart or not smart, but how bright the light is that we're given, and how not bright it is. But we can apply that to many other characteristics and things that we do. We can apply it to kindness. We can apply it to patience. We can apply it to so many different things that we can understand what our full capacity is. And that's the next step that you have to take. Understand what your capacity is. What tools were you created with? Once you can recognize what tools you were created with, now you can go and figure out how to pull out the rest of the stuff from inside of you. If I was created with this tool and I'm missing this, then I need to do this in order to be able to reach 100%. But that the understanding has to be that my job here on this world is to reach 100% of the capacity that I've been given. Now let's take a look again at the Mishnah. Every one of us is stuck behind a barrier. Every person has strengths and weaknesses. Even though we sometimes forget that, and we sometimes look at people and we say, that person's got it all. If you stand with them for a day or two, you will see that they don't have it all. And that what you're seeing and the context that you're seeing them in, they have it all. Put them in another context and they don't have it all. You take a person who's a great sportsman and popular and people love them and everything. It's great. But then when you start to get to know them, you realize that they too have shortcomings. And the mission is trying to get us to be able to recognize we're so bent on finding our strengths, the normal person, so that we have to also be able to recognize what our limitations are in order to be able to achieve greatness. The reason why it brings it out in chachma, in wisdom, is because you got to know something to do something. And when you recognize what you know, so then you can develop what you need to do. So take a look at number one. Number one is Amar Lishmo Amar La'abed. A person who is quick to learn, but very quick to lose it. And we mentioned that that's a person who just doesn't retain anything. It goes in one ear and it goes out the other. So a person looks at that and he says, was kementin, what can I do? It's just the way I am. It's my nature, right? I'm slow to, I can't hold on to it. There's no, you can't fault me for that. It's just the way I am. The truth is, it's not true. Because there are things that you can do to ensure that you hold on to things and that they don't just fall out of your head. One of those things is called Hazara, review. You sit in a shir, you learn something, you say, I've got it. 6 months later, you go back to that same passage and you look at it and you go, wow, that's so interesting. And what you don't realize is that you learned that already. This happens a lot with Daf Yomi and with even with Chumash, even with the parashas. That's the reason why every year we go over the parasha again, and it's like you're learning it brand new. Even though this message you could have heard last year, right? You got the same message, but you just keep going over it. And the reason that you keep going over it is because at the end of the day, we forget things. How do you keep that in your head? Do Hazara review. I'm not telling you have to do this, but imagine if when you finished tonight, you took out a little pad, your Pirkei Avos pad, and you wrote down 5 points that you got from tonight's class. Or you wrote over the mishna with some of the ideas that we spoke about, very briefly, bullet points, that will stay in your head. Even if you're not a person that is endowed with a great memory. That's one tool that a person can use in order to be able to retain. The person whose nature is such that he doesn't retain things. You're not faulted for that. Your nature is that you can't retain it. But God gave you that. God created you that way. He also gave you, therefore, the capacity to be able to work against that. And the tool to use to work against it, one of those tools, is by writing things down, by Hazara, by reviewing. Another tool, I meant by reviewing, another tool is to write things down. Because if you write things down, so then they'll stay in your head. Let's look at number 2. Number 2, we said, was a person who it was very hard to learn. It didn't go in the head. Geht nicht da rein in Kopf, they say. Yeah, it doesn't go quickly into the head. But once it gets in the head, so then it doesn't go anywhere. So a person has to recognize that, you know what? I'm not so swift and I'm not so bright. So that means that I have to figure out things to do to make it easier. One of the things, I just got a recommendation for a child, that a student that was diagnosed with all kinds of letters. I don't even know what all the letters mean, but this person is he's got a big challenge in front of him. He just has to remember all the letters that go after his name, and it's not LCSW and doctor, PhD, that kind of stuff. I mean, these are letters that describe diseases. So one of the recommendations was to put the person closer to the teacher, to let them take pictures of the things you write on the board, so that they can have it right in front of them, so they don't get distracted. All kinds of things like that. Well, when a person's not sick, he doesn't go to the doctor and say, the doctor says you got ADHD, MRF, whatever, right? You don't get all that stuff. But you know that you just don't hop so quickly. You know that you can sit through a 45-minute shir. It's getting the right. So there are 2 things you could do. The one is you could say, I'm not going back. I'm not going back. The second thing you can do is you could say, I got to do things to make it easier for me to be able to assimilate this. Maybe I need to turn off the TV. Maybe I need to lower the music. Maybe I need to sit up instead of lying down. I'm not saying that you can't lie down when you learn, but I'm just saying for this person, he has to look at himself and say, good, this is my nature. What do I need to do to be able to work with this nature and to improve it? And again, if we can do this in wisdom, we can do this in anything. This is my nature. I'm this kind of person. Okay, but this kind of person can do these kinds of things and become that kind of person. I'm naturally stingy. I can't give away money. Okay, so then what can I do now to be able to learn how to give away money? To be able to learn how to work with that nature and to be able to become a benevolent person. I don't like people in my house. How do I become a person that's a kinder person? Well, I have to figure out. There's no easy answer, but I have to figure out for me, what don't I like about having so many people around? What can I do to make it more comfortable? We do it in wisdom, but it applies to everything, because this is the next step in Tzidkas. I just want to go back to this for a second. A person who finds it very hard to learn. I remember when I got to yeshiva, there was a fellow, they pointed to that fellow And they said, that guy has a shvacha cup. Shvacha cup means, a weak head. But he's the best guy in the yeshiva. I'm thinking, whoa, I'm like in minor leagues here. Like, what does it mean? Guy's got a shvacha cup, he's got a weak head, but he's the best guy in yeshiva. What does it say about the rest of us? Like we're brain damaged. So and over the years, I realized what it was is that naturally this guy was this number 2. He was a kosher lishmoa. It didn't go in so quickly. But what this guy did was that he would sit there. You would walk into Beis Medrash, into the study hall at 2:00 in the morning. You could see this guy pacing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And he was talking to himself. So if you didn't know what was going on, you'd say this guy's meshuggah, right? It was before they had the little ear things that, when you saw somebody talking to themselves, they were actually meshuggah. Right? They weren't talking to somebody else on a phone that you couldn't see. But this guy, what was he doing? He was going over the lesson. And he was going over the lesson that he learned that day in the shir, and he was just going over it, saying it over, so that he could put it into his head, and then he would work out all the kinks in the lesson. And by doing this, you would see this guy walking, even during the day, wherever you would see him, he would be talking, because he would be reviewing and going over. And this guy became, today, he is a well-known Talmud Chacham, a well-known Torah scholar. And a Torah scholar doesn't mean somebody who understands things. He has an incredible range of knowledge. But it didn't come naturally to him, because he recognized what he was missing, and he said, I've got a 40% capacity, but I got to make that 40% capacity burn at 100%. Okay, look at number 3. So we had a problem with number 3 because we said number 3 is not working hard. Number 3 is he's easy to learn and easy to forget. And he's easy to retain his knowledge. So, but we said, but that's like a natural thing. God gave you that talent. So why is that? Why is it considered a chacham? There was a guy in our yeshiva who the yeshiva would start, the study day would start at 9:00 in the morning. And this guy would show up, I don't know, 11:30, 12. He'd sit around, he'd have a cup of coffee, smoke a cigarette outside, then he'd schmooze with a bunch of guys. And then, sat down, learned for a couple of minutes, and he left. And then you'd see him again the next day. I mean, it was an anomaly. This guy knew everything. He was able to chap the shir. He listened for 2 minutes. He got it. But the guy wasn't a chacham, because he wasn't putting any work. If this guy would have put in work, then he could have been a gadol ador. He could have been a giant. Because all he was doing was going with what he was given naturally, and he was using his natural talent. His natural talent was to be able to understand things. Great, shkoyach. But so he had the basis of becoming a chacham. That's what the Mishnah is saying. When he says he's a chacham, it doesn't mean that he's a Talmud chacham. It means that he's a wise person. And a wise person really only becomes a Talmud chacham. He only becomes a scholar if he puts his energy and an effort into it. And again, it's the same theme. Learning what your nature is, and then using that nature. Person who's got that, a person who knows, I chap very quickly. I've got, one of my children is like that. You can get things like that, but never relied on that. Well, maybe in grade school, but once they started becoming a thinking person, never relied on that and realized that I could do so much more with this knowledge because I get it first time around. So when I get it first time around, I can now do things with it. I can develop it into something amazing. And look at number 4. So we said that number 4 is a chelik ra. We said that's a bad portion. So I want to give you 2 explanations of this. The first is that it is, in fact, the chelik ra. It's a bad portion. But the reason it's called the chelik ra, it doesn't mean that you got a bad gift from God. But it means that if you're a person who falls into this category, this is more than just what God gave you. A person who is a kosher lishmo, it's hard to learn, and a ma'ir la'abed, and you lose it all very quickly. Whatever it is you get, you can't retain it and you lose it. So you're done and cooked on both levels. You have to understand something. You know why that's happening to you? It's got to be because you're filling your head with other things. because it's just not normal. Even for a person who's a kosher lishmoa, who it's hard for him to learn, you have the capacity to be able to retain things. You have the capacity to be able to learn things, but you're not doing that. You're just staying in that level. And when you stay in that level, that's taka, a bad thing. Because what's the whole point here? Recognize your nature and work with it. But I think there's even something more profound that the Mishnah is telling me. That, you know what, it's a chelik ra. It is, in fact, a bad thing. And you got the short end of the stick. When God was giving out wisdom sticks, you got the short end. No question about it. But maybe God wants you to have the short end of the stick. Because look at yourself a little bit. Maybe your strength is not in wisdom. Maybe your strength is in kindness and love. Maybe you have incredible organizational skills, but not great wisdom. Maybe you have amazing people skills, but not book depth. Just because you were given a chelek ra, you were given the short end of the wisdom stick, doesn't mean you were given the short end of the life stick. Find where your strengths are and go develop that. Maybe God gave you the short end of the wisdom stick so that you would find the long end of the stick that you've been given, of the strengths that you have, so that you can develop those strengths. Not everybody was made to be a Talmid Chacham. Not everybody was made to be a world's giant. Again, 100% capacity of what you have, that you were given. But to be somebody who is a 120 light bulb, maybe you weren't given that. You were given a 10 watt or a 4 watt bulb in wisdom. But maybe you were given a 150 watt bulb when it comes to organization or kindness. And maybe your job is to organize tzedakos, is to organize communal things, is to organize benevolent things, helpful things, is to organize things, is to give to people, is to be there, to be that kind person on the shoulder that people can cry on. Maybe that's what your strength is. Because I think that's what this Mishnah is telling me. I don't think that we would have seen this right off the bat when you read the Mishnah. It sounded like it was talking about learners, which is actually in 4 weeks' time. But this is actually not about students. We're only bringing it out of the students because, again, everybody wants to learn something. You need to learn something to do something. But it's really about life. And it's about recognizing what your strengths and weaknesses are and not just rising above them, recognizing this is who I am and now I've got to change that, recognizing that this is the weakness that I have and I have to learn how to compensate for that. I have to learn how I can use my other strengths to be able to accomplish 100% of the potential that I've been given. That's my idea. Now, my suggestion is spend 3 to 5 minutes when you click off and just jot down. I mean, if I showed you all the notes that I have, stuck in on sticky papers, stuck into my books. Just jot down what the point of this Mishnah was, that it's all about understanding your nature and learning how to learning how to compensate for what you're missing and strengthen what you've been giving. You stick it somewhere, you got it. You look back at this Mishnah in 4 weeks' time, it's going to stay in the head. Okay. Everybody should have a beautiful, amazing, wonderful night and a beautiful, amazing, wonderful week. And Im Yirtzeh Hashem, we'll see you again next week. Next week, I think we talk about tzedakah. Yeah. Next week, we talk about the 4 different characteristics of charity. And again, following the same pathway that we have chosen here, we're going to keep that consistent with this with what I think the theme is of this section of the Mishnah. Okay, it's awesome to see everybody, and get your shots.
Yep.
And stay healthy and safe.
Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay, it's a pleasure. It's great to see everybody.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Okay. I'm clicking off, and those that are coming for Daf Yomi, just click back in. I'm gonna click right in.